I'm your faculty and coach for the subject Business Environment. I'm Vivek Burda, Senior Assistant Professor with Tirthankar Mahavir University, and had taken a large number of sessions for this topic. So far, we have covered large number of things. We have covered, if I just give you a glimpse, we have covered the basic overview of the business environment, in which we have seen the types of environment. We have seen about the internal environment, external environment. Then we have seen about the macro environment, macro environment. Additionally, we have seen about the competitive structures of this part, then about the competitor analysis, environmental analysis, strategic part, and also. And even in the initial part, we have seen about the nature, scope, and objectives of the businesses, in which we have seen about the business as a system. We have seen about the classification of the businesses. We have even seen about the classification of industries, and also about the various types of business and their goals. Then recently, in the last 2-3 classes, we have seen about the environmental analysis or environmental scanning, in which we have seen about the environmental analysis and environmental scanning, their techniques of analysis, then steps or the approaches of environmental analysis, then types of environmental forecasting, or basically we have seen about the forecasting, then types of environmental forecasting, the techniques of environmental forecasting. Additionally, we have seen about the benefits, importance of environmental analysis, the limitations of the environmental forecasting, and so on. Now, furthermore, we will be moving to the detailed part, in which we will be studying about additional components in detail, and we'll be studying about various types of environment which impact the businesses. And so we will be starting out with the first environment, that is called economic environment. In order to study this environment, we will be covering this topic into the 4 segments, in which we will be studying about the nature of the economy, the structure of the economy, economic policies, economic conditions, and then we'll conclude it. So first, we need to understand what is economic environment and the basic overview about it. See, when we talk about the business fortunes and the strategies, they are influenced by economic characteristics and the economic policy dimensions. The economic environment includes the structure and the nature of the economy, the stages of the development of the economy, the economic resources, the level of the income, the distribution of the income, and the asset, global economic linkages, economic policies, etc. Few important economic factors which are described below. First, for example, the nature of the economy. The general level of the development of the economy has a lot of implications for the businesses. It has significant bearing on the nature and size of the demand, government policies affecting businesses, etc. Countries and even different regions within the country show differences in the level and the pattern of the economic development. A widely used method for the classification of the economies is on the basis of per capita income, that is the average annual income per person. Accordingly, countries are broadly classified as the low income, middle income, and the high income economies by the world. The low income economies are the economies where very low level of per capita income of the economies, per capita GNI, that is gross national income, or new term even called as GNP, is approximately $1,045 or less as termed with respect to 2014 census. They are regarded as the low income economies. And at present, or you can say based on the 2012 data, there were 32 low income economies across the world. High income economies are those which have a very high or very rich income per capita. Those have per capita GNI of $12,736 or above in 2014, which fall in the category of the high income economies. In 2012, there were 35 high income economies, and they are mainly categorized on the high income economies, which namely are industrial economies and the oil exporters. Falling in between the low income economies and the high income economies are the middle income economies. The middle economies are subdivided into the lower income groups, those who have the per capita GNI between $1,046 to $4,046 in 14, and the upper middle income group is from $4,027 to $12,615 economies. In 2012, there were 66 middle income economies, that is 33 upper and 33 lower middle income. The number of the countries given in this section includes only those with a population of more than 3 million. There are about 80 countries in the population of less than 3 million, or which surprise the data. Thus, the differences in the income level between the countries is not true reflection of the purchasing powers or the living standards of the people. For example, international comparison of the GNP and the per capita income in the nominal currency unit says US dollars do not reflect a realistic picture because of the purchasing power of the nation currency is very. Further, the exchange rate changes would give a misleading picture of the position of the country. When the income is converted into the dollars from the national currency, for instance, if the national currency has depreciated against the dollars at a rate higher than GNI growth rate, when the GNI is converted into the dollar, it will show a decline even though the GNI is actually increased in terms of the national currency. To overcome such problems, it has become common to estimate the GNI and the per capita income at purchasing power parity, that is PPP. For example, in 2015, the per capita income of the India was estimated to be 1,688 US dollars in PPP terms, and it was estimated at 6,209 US dollars. What does this mean? Is that a bundle of goods which cost 1,688 US dollars in India will cost around this 6,209 US dollars in USA? No, in other words, it will be 1,688 in India is equivalent to having 6,209 in US. So remember, this is a table which has been taken out, which is comparing the economies in 2015 and 2020, which compare the nominal GDP between various countries and also the PDP, GDP, billion dollars, and the rank for the countries. You can see the US in the top list. India is somewhere on the position 7, and Mexico on the top, under the top 15 on the 15th position. So these are following things which is just basically some countries with the first 15 ranks in 20 doesn't figure in the table as they were not given within the 15 ranks in 2015. So this is something which you need to ensure that the rank of the various economies of various countries keeps on changing from time to time. So now developing and developed economic countries is often used to is often used as a classification of the countries. Use of the terms of the developed and the developing through convenient is not, however, intended to imply that all economies in the group of the developing are experiencing similar development or other than economies have reached or preferred or the final stage of the development. Classification of the income does not necessarily reflect development status. In the group of high income economies, the industrial economies are developed economies. All the oil exporters are not developed economies. For example, Kuwait and UAE, two high income economies, are regarded as developing economies. Besides income, some other criteria such as sectoral distribution of the income and the employee generation, social deployment indicators, etc., are applied to consider whether an economy is developed or developing one. Besides the income and the social dimensions, there are a number of common characteristics of the developed economy. They are characterized by widespread use of modern and sophisticated technology, continuous innovation, fast diffusion of the new ideas and the technologies, low share of the primary sector, that is mainly agriculture, and the dominance of the territory service sector, and the secondary most manufacturing sectors in income and the employment generation. Market-friendly economic policies, comparatively open trade and the investment policies, democratic rights, competition, and the consumer choice, etc. So further to this, sometimes the term less developed country, that is called LDC, are more developed countries, and the more developed country, that is MDCs, are used to refer to the developing and the developed countries, and the use of the term underdeveloped to refer to the developing countries is also common. Low income is just an indication of the deprivation of people in developing countries. Low income prevents access to even basic necessities, not only better and modern amenities. Further, in the developing economies, the inequality in the distribution of the income is very high. And as a result, large proportion of the population lives in the object poverty. Although many countries have achieved a considerable reduction in the poverty, the incidence of the poverty is very high in many countries. And they are generally characterized by high birth and the population growth rates, death rates, and also higher than in the developed countries. The developing countries are generally characterized by the prevalence of the rudimentary and traditional methods and the obsolete technologies. The growth of developed as well as the developing countries in the heterogeneous mixture because of the large number of developing countries exhibit a very diverse spectrum. Within the category of the low income economies, for example, sometimes spatial categories by the name least developed economies is identified. Most of the least developed economies suffer from one or more of the following constraints: a very low GNP per capita, the hemlock remote insulatory desertification and exposure to the natural disasters. However, the Human Development Report 2015, there were 48 least developed countries, including Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives, Mali, Uganda, Myanmar, Sudan, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Yemen. And there are, on the other hand, developing economies which have been experiencing rapidly industrialization, such as Hong Kong, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and the Asian tigers. They are sometimes roughly called as new industrializing economy. Some publications use the term new industrialized instead of industrializing to refer them. Now, the People's Republic of China, or we can say China, is regarded as a new industrializing economy. And new industrializing economy shows a very high growth rate over a long period of economy and per capita income. They have also been presenting very impressive export performances. Those economies which are in transition from the centralized economy system to the market economy are referred to as a transition economy. And the transition economy thus are former communist socialist economy, erstwhile USSR, that is the present CIS, and the East European countries, which are undergoing an economic system transition. They also represent a transition from authorization to the democracy. An indication or an indicated earlier income is not the only criteria to consider the country as a developed. There is indeed some more important differences between the economic growth and the development. An increase in the income is an indication of the economic growth. The economic development besides growth of some qualitative dimensions too, such as distribution of the income, standard of the living, consumption of the output, characters of the working condition, and the overall improvement in the economic welfare. The difference in the income and the development levels have important implications for the business. In the developing country, the low income may be a reason for very low demand for the product. The sale of the product for which the demand is income elastic naturally increases there an increase in the income, but a firm is unable to increase the purchasing power of the people to generate a higher demand for its product. Hence, it may have to reduce the price of the product to increase the sale. The reduction in the cost of the production may have to be effected to facilitate the price reduction. It may even be necessary to invent or develop a new cost product to suit the low income market. Thus, a Colgate designed a very simple hand-driven, inexpensive $10 washing machine for low-income buyers in the less developed countries. Similarly, the National Cash Register Company took an innovative step towards developing crank-operated cash register, which would save the half of the cost of modern cash register, and this was very well received in a number of developing countries. In countries where investment and the incomes are steadily and rapidly rising, business prospects are generally bright and further investments are encouraged. There are a number of economists and the businessmen who felt that the developed countries are no longer worthwhile propositions for investment because these economies have reached more or less saturation level in certain respects. In developed economies, replacement demand accounts for a considerable amount of total demand for many consumers durables, whereas the replacement demand is negligible in the developing economies. Now the next topic in this part is we need to study about the structure of the economy. See, the structure of the economy is basically they are the factors such as contribution of different sectors like primary, that is mostly agricultural, or the secondary, that is mainly industrial, or the tertiary, that is secondary sector, large scale sector, medium scale sector, and the small scale sectors, and the tiny sectors to the economy. And their linkages, integration with the world economy, etc., are important to the business because these factors indicate the prospects for different type of businesses, certain factors which affect the business, etc. For example, if an economy is highly integrated with the global economy, it will be quickly affected by development in the global economy. Normally, as the economy develops, the share of the primary sector in the GDP and the employment declines, and those of the other sector increases. After a certain stage, the share of the manufacturing sector will or may be also declining. The developed economies are primarily service economies in the sense that the service sector guarantees bulk of the employment and the income. The contribution of service to the GDP and the employment is sustainably high in particularly the developed economies. In this table, you can see the contribution of services to the value added with respect to 1980, 1990 and 2010 when we compared the global, when we compare the high income economies, when we compare the low and the medium income economies, that is called the developing countries, and also India. And this source, the data for the source is through the World Bank, World Development Report over there, in which we can see the shift of the contribution of services to the value added as percentage of the GDP for each sector. Thus, the nature of each sector has business implications. For example, although India is one of the largest producers of several agricultural products because of the small and the fragmented nature of holding land holdings, the effective collection and the processing of the produce becomes difficult. Thus, the land holding pattern may also productivity improvements difficult. It may also has implications for the agriculture input basis. Next, over here, the tremendous growth of the trade in the services and the more recently of the electronic commerce is part of the new trade pattern. Exports of the commercial services have been growing on a very every contingent, particularly Asia, throughout 1990s and later. Thus, the change has its own special significance as services are frequently used in the production of the goods and even to the other services. Thus, the enhanced international competition in the service means reduction in the price and improvement in the quality that will enhance the competitiveness of the downstream industries. Both industrial and the developing economies have much to gain by opening their market. Developing countries would drive large gains from an easing of the barriers to the agricultural products and to labor-intensive contribution to the maritime services. Over the term, electronic businesses will loom large as an area where the expanding opportunities for the trade requires an expanding framework of the rule. So now moving further to discuss about the economic policies. There are several economic policies which could have a very great impact on the businesses. The important economic policies are industrial policy, trade policy, foreign exchange policy, monetary policy, fiscal policy, foreign investment policy, and the technology policy. Some type of the categories of the businesses are favorably affected by the government policies and other are adversely affected, which is with while it is neutral in respect for others. Similarly, an industry that falls with the priority sector in terms of the government policy may get affected number of incentives and the other positive support from the government, whereas industries which are regarded as inessential may have odd number of them. Now, the industrial policy can industrial policy can even define the scope and role of business sectors like the private and the public, joint and the cooperative, and large and medium, and the small and the tiny. It may influence the location of the industrial undertakings, the choice of the technology, the scale of the operations, product mix, and so on. In India, under the liberalization surge in 1991, the scope of private sector, particularly of large enterprises, was very limited. Thus, the development of the 17 of the most important industries has reserved for the state. In the development of another 12 major industries, the state also plays a dominant role. In the remaining industries, cooperative enterprises such as cooperative enterprises or the joint sector enterprises and the small scale units were to have a preferential treatment over the large entrepreneurs in the private sector. Further, the production of the large number of items were reserved for the exclusive manufacturers of the small scale sector. Even in respect of the industries which were open to the private sector, the entry and the growth were regulated by licensing and also by it. In case of the certain categories of the large firms, the MRTP Act, the government policy thus limited to the scope of the private businesses. However, the new industrial unearthed in July 1991 has widely overspread all but a few industries for the private sector, dramatically changing the business environment. In the pre-liberalization era, the government policy has a severe strain on the portfolio and the growth strategies of the companies.